April 10th, 2026, 2:14 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. Inside the control gallery of the Hoover Dam, a series of haptic alerts vibrate across the tablets of Bureau of Reclamation engineers. For 89 years, this room has hummed with the confidence of a civilization that thought it had tamed the Colorado River. But right now, the data coming off the pressure sensors in the 4 primary intake towers is doing something the original 1930s blueprints said was impossible. The water level has just ticked past a threshold marked in red on the internal lithographs, a point of no return that was supposed to be a 1,000-year outlier. It isn't happening in one intake tunnel, it is happening in all 3 primary feeds. The massive concrete throats that supply the lifeblood to 40 million Americans in the Pacific Southwest are being slowly, methodically strangled by a lake that is disappearing in real time. We are no longer talking about a drought. We are talking about a geophysical collapse of a managed system. Hi, my name is Daniel, and this is Natural Disasters. Today, we are analyzing the reality of Deadpool and the terrifying engineering secret buried beneath the Mojave Desert. Deadpool. The word sounds like a comic book character, but in the world of deep geophysical analysis and civil engineering, it is the sound of a heartbeat stopping. Technically, Deadpool is the elevation at which Lake Mead can no longer release water through its existing gravity-fed outlet works. Not through the massive penstocks that spin the 17 primary turbines. Not through the river outlets that feed the downstream ecosystems of Arizona and California. Nothing. The water becomes a dead pool, trapped behind a $165 million wall of concrete that can no longer move it. That elevation is 950 feet above sea level. In 2022, the world watched in shock as the lake plunged to 1,041 feet. As of today, April 10, 2026, after a series of failed monsoon seasons and a record-shattering heat dome that turned the upper Colorado Basin into a kiln, we are looking at a level of 1,018 feet. We are within striking distance of a total systemic shutdown. The scale of this loss is difficult for the human mind to process without looking at the geology. The bathtub ring, that pale, ghostly stripe of calcium carbonate carved into the volcanic rock of Black Canyon, now towers nearly 300 feet above the current waterline. That is 300 vertical feet of water gone. In terms of mass, we have lost over 19 million acre-feet of water. To put that in geophysical terms, we have removed approximately 25 billion tons of weight from the Earth's crust in this specific GPS coordinate. This massive unloading is causing a measurable crustal rebound. The ground beneath the lake is literally rising as the pressure of the water vanishes, a phenomenon tracked by USGS GNSS stations that shows the basin floor has uplifted by nearly several centimeters since the year 2000. But while the ground rises, the water falls. The intake towers, those iconic Art Deco cylinders, were designed to drink from a full reservoir. Right now, the upper ports are sucking air. The lower ports are struggling with vortexing, swirling funnels of air that threaten to cavitate the massive turbines. The throats are gasping. And buried inside the Bureau's classified infrastructure reports is an emergency contingency so expensive, so desperate, and so quietly executed that it reveals the true depth of the panic. They didn't just build a new tunnel. They built a $1.4 billion third straw because they knew the original dam was going to fail its primary mission. The question isn't whether the water is gone. The question is, what happens when the last emergency system is the only thing left between 40 million people and an uninhabitable desert? April 11th, 2026, 4:12 a.m. Near the Nevada-Arizona border, the USGS seismic monitoring station at Boulder City registers a series of microtremors. But they aren't the tectonic signatures of the Walker Lane or the San Andreas. They are something different. These are shallow focus events, occurring at depths of less than 3 kilometers, directly beneath the floor of the boulder basin. For the geophysicists at the USGS Nevada Water Science Center, the data is hauntingly familiar. In the 1930s, when the Bureau of Reclamation first filled Lake Mead, the sheer weight of the water, billions of tons of it, depressed the Earth's crust, triggering thousands of load-induced earthquakes. Now, in the spring of 2026, the crust is doing the opposite. As the water vanishes, the Earth is snapping back. It is a massive slow-motion elastic rebound. The removal of 25 trillion pounds of hydrostatic pressure is causing the mid-slope fault and the lakeside fault to shift in ways that haven't been seen since the Pleistocene. But the most alarming data isn't coming from the seismographs. It's coming from the Bureau of Reclamation's internal 24-month study and the real-time telemetry from the low lake level pumping station L3PS. At 8:30 a.m., engineers at the Southern Nevada Water Authority observe a critical drop in hydraulic head. This is the pressure generated by the weight of the water column sitting above the intakes. As the surface elevation of Lake Mead drops toward 1,000 feet, the pressure required to force that water through the massive 15-foot diameter penstocks and into the turbines begins to fail. We are watching the physics of a starvation event. To understand the chronology of this disaster, we have to look at the data points that led us to this April morning. Between 2000 and 2022, the lake level dropped by an average of 12 feet per year. But by 2024, the rate accelerated. A series of mega-drought years, identified by the NOAA National Centers for Environmental Information as the driest in 1,200 years of North American history, decimated the snowpack in the upper Colorado River Basin. The Rocky Mountains, which act as a water tower for the American West, saw snow drought conditions where precipitation fell as rain and evaporated before it could ever reach the river. By 2025, the inflows at Lake Powell were so low that the Glen Canyon Dam stopped releasing enough water to stabilize Mead. The technical reality of the third straw, officially known as intake number 3, now takes center stage. This is a $1.4 billion emergency umbilical cord. Completed in 2015, it was a desperate gamble. Engineers used a 23-foot diameter tunnel boring machine to chew through nearly 3 miles of solid volcanic rock, the Saddle Island Formation, to reach the very bottom of the lake. They drilled to an elevation of 860 feet. At the time, it was called the ultimate insurance policy. But by April 10, 2026, insurance is no longer a metaphor. It is the only thing keeping Las Vegas from an immediate evacuation order. At 11:45 a.m., a Bureau of Reclamation technician, whose name we have redacted from the internal logs, noted, "Vibration sensors on turbine N4 are showing harmonic interference. It sounds like a jet engine running on gravel. We are seeing the first signs of cavitation." Cavitation is a death sentence for a dam. When water pressure drops too low, tiny bubbles of water vapor form, and then collapse with enough force to pit and destroy solid steel. The dam isn't just running out of water. The very act of trying to generate power with what little is left is physically tearing the machinery apart. The red zone threshold wasn't just a number on a spreadsheet. It represents the vortex limit. As the water gets shallower, the intakes begin to pull in air from the surface, creating massive, swirling whirlpools, vortices, that can destabilize the internal plumbing of the dam. We are seeing surface-to-intake vortices at all 4 towers, reports a simulated transcript from the April 2026 emergency briefing at the Regional Operations Center in Henderson, Nevada. If we don't throttle back the releases to the Central Arizona Project and California, we are going to lose the ability to maintain the internal cooling systems for the dam's power plant itself. The dam will essentially suffocate. This is the coupled system collapse, that climate scientists warned about. It isn't just a lack of rain. It is a feedback loop where the geology, the hydrology, and the 20th century infrastructure are all failing simultaneously. The crustal rebound is shifting the very bedrock the dam is anchored to. The lack of pressure is destroying the turbines. And the chemistry of the water is changing. As the lake shrinks, the concentration of minerals and sediment increases, creating a brine that is corrosive to the 90-year-old concrete. According to a 2026 USGS technical memorandum, the dissolution rates of the limestone layers within the surrounding canyon walls have increased by 4% due to the altered water chemistry at lower depths. Every metric is trending toward the red. The clock isn't just ticking. The gears are starting to grind to a halt. To understand the sheer magnitude of the 2026 crisis, we must look at the original scene of Western hydrology. The Colorado River Compact of 1922. It is perhaps the most consequential mathematical error in American history. Signed at Bishop's Lodge in Santa Fe, New Mexico, the compact was based on flow data from 1905 to 1922, a period that three-ring reconstructions from the University of Arizona now confirm was the single wettest window in the last 1,200 years. The men who carved up the river were measuring a statistical anomaly and calling it a baseline. They allocated 15 million acre-feet of water annually to the 7 basin states, plus another 1.5 million to Mexico later on. But the river's long-term true mean is barely 12.5 million. We have been living on a 3 million acre-foot per year lie for over a century. This isn't the first time American engineering hubris has faced a geological reckoning. In March 1928, the same Francis Dam in San Francisquito Canyon, California, suffered a catastrophic structural failure just hours after being inspected by the legendary William Mulholland. The resulting flood killed over 400 people and effectively ended Mulholland's career. But what is happening at Hoover Dam in 2026 is the inverse of St. Francis. It isn't a sudden burst of water, it is a sudden, absolute absence of it. While St. Francis was a failure of the foundation, Lake Mead is a failure of the source. The geophysical scale of this disappearance is staggering. Since the year 2000, the volume of water lost from Lake Mead, approximately 19 million acre-feet, is equivalent to 23.4 cubic kilometers. To put that in perspective for the American viewer, the 1980 eruption of Mount St. Helens in Washington state removed roughly 2.7 cubic kilometers of mountain. We have essentially erupted the volume of nearly 9 Mount St. Helens worth of water out of the desert through evaporation and overconsumption. This massive mass-wasting event has triggered a measurable crustal response. USGS GNSS stations in the Lake Mead National Recreation Area have recorded a vertical elastic rebound of the Earth's crust. As the 25 trillion pounds of water weight vanishes, the lithosphere is flexing upward by nearly 12 centimeters in some sectors. This isn't just a plumbing problem. We are literally altering the shape of the North American plate's surface in the southwest. Then there is the sediment ghost. For nearly 90 years, the Colorado River has been depositing millions of tons of silt, clay, and sand into the headwaters of Lake Mead. This sediment doesn't just sit there. It forms a massive, submerged delta that creeps slowly toward the dam wall. Under normal operating conditions, this sediment is kept at bay by the sheer depth of the water. But as of April 2026, with the lake level hovering near the 1,010-foot mark, the delta front is becoming unstable. A 2025 confidential report from the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers warned that a sediment slump, a massive underwater landslide triggered by the receding waterline, could potentially bury the emergency low-level intakes of the third straw. If a seismic event, perhaps triggered by the crustal rebound we are seeing, causes that sediment wedge to liquefy and slide, the $1.4 billion emergency pumping station could be choked with mud in a matter of minutes. The Coupled Model Intercomparison Project, CMIP-6 simulations for 2026 to 2030 suggest a 65% probability that the river will never see a normal flow year again in our lifetimes. Scientists are moving away from the word drought, which implies a temporary state, to the term aridification. This is a permanent climate shift. Historically, the American West has seen mega droughts lasting 50 to 100 years, such as the one that collapsed the ancestral Puebloan civilizations in the 13th century. Those people could move, but 40 million people in 2026, tied to fixed infrastructure like the Central Arizona Project and the Los Angeles Aqueduct, have nowhere to go. The twist in the data that water managers are terrified to discuss publicly is the Deadpool death spiral. As the lake drops, the surface area decreases, but the concentration of total dissolved solids, TDS, increases. The water becomes saltier, heavier, and more difficult to treat. By the time Mead reaches 950 feet, the water at the bottom, the only water the third straw can reach, will be so chemically dense with accumulated minerals and legacy agricultural runoff that existing treatment plants in Henderson and Las Vegas may not be able to process it without billions of dollars in immediate upgrades. We are reaching the point where the water isn't just gone. The water that remains is becoming a geological brine that our civilization wasn't built to drink. The human cost of the 2026 Deadpool crisis is not measured in a single explosion or a sudden surge of water, but in the agonizing, silent surrender of a century of expansion. Inside the low lake level pumping station, L3PS, 120 feet beneath the scorching Mojave bedrock, senior engineer Elias Thorne watches a wall of monitors that shouldn't exist. He is the man in charge of the third straw, and on the morning of April 12, 2026, the vibration sensors on pump number 12, one of the 34 massive 3,800 horsepower vertical turbine pumps, start to scream. It's the intake velocity, Thorne notes in his shift log, a document already being subpoenaed by emergency legislative committees in Carson City. We are pulling water from so deep, and the lake level is so low, that we are beginning to draw sediment plumes from the canyon floor. We are essentially sandblasting the interior of a billion-dollar machine. For Thorne, the crisis isn't a headline. It's the physical sensation of the ground vibrating beneath his boots as the city of Las Vegas fights the gravity of a dying reservoir. Outside the pressurized safety of the pumping station, the reality is even more grim. In Pinal County, Arizona, the agricultural heart of the state is being dismantled in real time. Sarah Benally, a hydrologist who grew up on the Navajo Nation and now consults for the Central Arizona Project, stands at the edge of a fallowed 500-acre alfalfa field near Casa Grande. The soil, once kept productive by a steady flow of Colorado River water delivered through hundreds of miles of concrete canals, is turning into a fine alkaline powder. We aren't just losing crops, Benally explains during a FEMA-coordinated briefing in Phoenix. We are losing the thermal mass of the valley. Without the evaporation from these fields, the local heat island effect is intensifying. We are seeing nighttime lows that don't drop below 100 degrees Fahrenheit. The infrastructure was designed for a desert, but not for a kiln. The economic fallout is projected by the US Department of Agriculture to exceed $35 billion in lost production and land devaluation by the end of 2026. But the most terrifying impact is on the PAS 46 power corridor, the massive high-voltage lines that move electricity across the West. In Los Angeles, Marcus Reed, a senior grid operator for CAISO, California Independent System Operator, watches the frequency monitors with a level of anxiety usually reserved for wildfire season. Hoover Dam has traditionally provided black start capability, the ability to jump-start the regional power grid in the event of a total blackout. As of April 2026, with Lake Mead's elevation dropping below the point of reliable power generation, that safety net is gone. Hoover isn't just a power plant, it's the grid's pacemaker, Reed says. When the water level drops, we lose the spinning reserve that balances the fluctuations of solar and wind. We are now one major heat wave away from a cascading regional failure that could dark start 3 states. In the exurban developments outside of Phoenix and Las Vegas, a silent migration has begun. Property values in neighborhoods dependent on cold water or shallow private wells have collapsed. Families who moved to the Sunbelt for the American dream are finding their life savings tied to a dry tap. FEMA has quietly begun the Southwest relocation analysis, a contingency plan for the potential evacuation of up to 250,000 residents from rural communities that can no longer sustain basic sanitation. On the I-15 and I-40 corridors, the traffic isn't just tourists anymore. It's U-Hauls moving east and north. The ecological consequences are equally catastrophic. The receding shoreline has exposed thousands of acres of playa, dry lakebed encrusted with decades of accumulated heavy metals, arsenic, and agricultural chemicals. As the fierce Mojave winds whip across the newly exposed flats, a toxic dust is being carried directly into the lungs of the 2.3 million residents of the Las Vegas Valley. Emergency rooms in Clark County report a 40% increase in respiratory distress cases since the beginning of 2026, a phenomenon local doctors are calling Mead asthma. The lake that was meant to be the desert's oasis has become its primary environmental threat. At the dam itself, the secret tunnels are no longer a matter of engineering pride, but of survivalist necessity. The Bureau of Reclamation has increased the security presence around the lower-level outlet works, fearing that desperate local factions might attempt to interfere with the delicate balancing act of shortage sharing. The tension between Arizona, Nevada, and California has moved from the courtroom to the riverbank. In a simulated transcript from an emergency meeting of the Colorado River Board, one official is heard saying, "The third straw isn't a solution. It's a straw for a glass that's nearly empty. We are fighting over the last 10%, while the other 90% has already evaporated into the history books." For the 40 million Americans dependent on the system, the sound of the 2026 Deadpool isn't a roar, it's the silence of a dry pipe. The year 2026 marks the end of the era of engineering optimism in the American West. As we look toward the remaining years of this decade, the data models from the National Center for Atmospheric Research in Boulder, Colorado, are no longer projecting a return to normal. They are projecting a systemic collapse of the coupled Western infrastructure. We have spent a century treating the Colorado River as a plumbing problem, but in the next 36 months it becomes a survival problem. The most immediate and terrifying risk beyond the dam itself is the water-energy nexus death spiral. Nowhere is this more precarious than at the Palo Verde nuclear generating station near Wintersburg, Arizona. Palo Verde is the largest power plant in the United States by net generation, and it is the only nuclear plant in the world that does not sit near a large body of surface water. It survives entirely on reclaimed wastewater from the city of Phoenix. But as the Colorado River's flow into the Central Arizona project dwindles, and Phoenix is forced into draconian Tier 3 and Tier 4 water cuts, the volume of wastewater decreases. If the third straw in Las Vegas is the emergency umbilical for water, Palo Verde's cooling system is the emergency brake for the entire western interconnection. If the water stops flowing to the cities stop flowing to the plant. If the plant goes offline, the lights go out from Albuquerque to Los Angeles. The crisis is also migrating from the reservoirs to the very soil of the American heartland. As Lake Mead drops toward the 950-foot Deadpool mark, The subsidence crisis in the Central Valley of California and the basins of Arizona is accelerating. Deprived of Colorado River water, industrial-scale agricultural operations are turning to fossil water, ancient aquifers that took millennia to fill. According to USGS INSAR satellite data, parts of the San Joaquin Valley and the Pinal Basin are sinking by as much as 30 centimeters per year. This isn't just a geological curiosity, it is a structural catastrophe. This subsidence is buckling the very canals, the California Aqueduct and the Coachella Canal, that are supposed to move the remaining water. We are witnessing an infrastructure system that is literally eating itself, sinking into the voids created by its own desperation. By 2027, the compact call becomes the most feared phrase in the American legal system. Under the 1922 treaty, if the upper basin states, Colorado, Wyoming, Utah, and New Mexico, cannot deliver the mandatory 7.5 million acre-feet to the lower basin, the entire legal framework of the West dissolves. We are looking at a future of water litigation that will paralyze state governments. But the river doesn't care about the Supreme Court. The river only cares about the hydrological reality. The forecast for the late 2020s suggests that even the $1.4 billion third straw has a shelf life. The intake at 860 feet was built to be the last straw, but it assumes there is still a liquid to be drawn. If the Colorado River continues to lose 10% of its flow for every degree of Celsius in temperature rise, the math for the 2030s simply does not hold. We are moving toward a post-river economy in the Southwest. The vulnerability of the United States logistics corridors cannot be overstated. The ports of Long Beach and Los Angeles handle 40% of the nation's containerized imports. Those ports rely on a massive workforce and a rail network, the BNSF and Union Pacific lines, that cut through the Mojave. If the water supply to the Inland Empire and the Coachella Valley fails, the labor force and the cooling systems for the massive server farms and logistics hubs that power the American economy will evaporate. We are not just talking about dry taps in Las Vegas. We are talking about a supply chain black hole centered in the American Southwest. This is the spreading risk, a ripple effect where a lack of snow in the Rockies leads to a power failure in California, which leads to a logistical collapse in Chicago and New York. The finale of the Lake Mead story is not a grand opening of a new dam, but the silent, dusty closing of a chapter of American history. Hoover Dam was the monument to the idea that nature could be conquered with 3.25 million cubic yards of concrete. But the bathtub ring is a more permanent monument, a record of our failure to respect the limits of the arid West. As of 2026, the engineers are no longer praying for rain. They are hardening the grid for the inevitable day when the turbines stop spinning for good. The red line has been crossed. The secret tunnels are open. The pumps are screaming. And the water, the heavy, silt-laden, mineral-rich remnant of a once mighty river, is all that's left. The data tells us that the West was built on a dream of a wet century that was actually a geological fluke. Now the fluke is over, and the long arid has begun. We can drill deeper, we can build more expensive straws, and we can write new treaties in the halls of Washington, D.C., but we cannot manufacture the rain. The survival of 40 million people now depends on a radical, painful decoupling from the Colorado River. The clock has run out. The pool is dying. The only thing left to do is follow the data, and the data says the desert is reclaiming its own. This is not a drill. This is the new American reality. My name is Daniel, and this was Natural Disasters.